And then she says to me, "Do you love me?" And I said, "No, that's a real nice ski mask." Oh, hey there. We are live, apparently. That was an old joke from Dumb and Dumber. Luke and I have said that many, many times. So before we get into this podcast / YouTube video, if you're watching this on YouTube, this is going to be an awesome one. This is going to be something that we wish someone had told us like 22 years ago when we were live bait guys only, that we wanted to go out there and consistently catch fish, like to have more freedom. I wish someone had told me this. And what we're about to go over is going to be one lure, and we believe it is the #1 overall saltwater fishing lure. And the reason why, Luke, it's because it's the most versatile, right? This does not mean like, oh, this is the only thing you should use. This does not mean that you're going to go out there and catch everything from speckled trout to marlin with it, even though you could, and it has been done with this one lure. But this is more of just making things simple, especially if you're into fishing live bait, if you want to become more consistent with lures, if you want to take your kids out and your family out and newbies out to catch fish fast, even on your lunch break, this is going to be a lure. I think the best analogy, Luke, is like golf. You know, if someone asks a golfer, hey, yeah, you have all these clubs, but if you could only play with one and actually play an entire 18 holes, which one would you use? That's kind of the analogy, right?
Yeah, and this isn't, I think people's radar might be coming up, oh, this is going to be like a product pitch. We're not talking about like one specific brand or type. You know, this is more of a type of lure.
Type, correct.
What type of lure, at least I believe all anglers, even freshwater, this one, we caught a ton of bass on these as well. This is, I think, the most well-rounded lure that I've ever used. And I know, many people, many of the other coaches we've worked with say the exact same thing. So it's definitely known in all. It's across regions too. It works everywhere.
Yeah,
shockingly well.
And we are going to reveal it here in just 1 second, and then we're going to talk about all the different ways to rig it. We're actually going to talk about how to retrieve it, and like the simplest ways just to get a ton of strikes. We're going to talk about the different depths. We're going to talk about different brands and even colors, and we're going to show a lot of footage too of some recent stuff we had on this particular lure. But first, here is a really, really exciting opportunity for you to fish with us. It is probably the #1 most requested thing we get from our insider members. And Luke's gone out with quite a few members and is doing more. And I know Tony's trying to do more as well. But overall, in general, like the #1 thing we hear is, hey, how can we like win a fishing trip with you guys? And we thought about it and we're like, all right, what's a cool contest that we could do that's still going to give a lot of, people a chance without being like, 1 in 100,000 chance. And we thought about it. This podcast is growing like crazy. I think we're getting close to like 500,000 total downloads, which is nuts. I mean, that's like a legit podcast. And I believe it's probably the most downloaded saltwater fishing podcast on all of iTunes. Yet, shame on us. We have done a horrible job. I think in the first 100 episodes, we never even asked for anyone to subscribe and leave us a review. And reviews, we found, are like the most important thing for you to get ranked in iTunes. It helps us get found. It helps other people find us, and it helps us go get better guests. And it helps us get really excited about putting a ton of time and energy and our money into this. So here's the deal. And we're going to go retroactive in case you are one of the like 160 people as we're recording this who have been nice enough to give us pretty much all 5-star reviews.
Your vote counts. Your
vote counts. So we're going to go back and actually, you still have to do something here. So all you have to do is go to iTunes. This is iTunes only, and this is completely free to enter, this completely free just drawing. And all you have to do is give us a review. I can't tell you it has to be 5-star, but I would encourage you, if you really like us and want to help us out, give us a 5-star review on iTunes. And I will warn you, it usually takes up to 30 minutes, even an hour, for iTunes to just to know that you're a legit verified person, and then it'll actually show up on iTunes. So you might have to type it in there. You have to be logged into your iTunes account, and then usually wait an hour or so. Go back and find it. Take a screenshot of your review, and then email it to fish fish@saltstrong.com, and somewhere in that subject line type in the word podcast review. That's an easy way for us to make sure we don't lose it. Just podcast review, and you could write more if you want to, but we will make sure that you are going to be in this giveaway. And it's going to be the entire month of September. So we're now, I think this is going live September the 3rd or something like that, somewhere around the Labor Day. So this will be the entire month of September, and we're shutting it down. Now, if you've done one in the past, all you have to do is go take a screenshot, and it better match your name. Don't take someone else's name. We are going to be looking at this stuff because this is going to be a big deal. I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do, but we're probably going to rent out a cool house like on the water on an island, and you get to spend at least 1, if not 2 days, like hopefully a weekend, where we go fish, have a couple beers, cook out, have just an absolute blast, and probably be able to bring a guest as well. I'm guessing, Luke, we haven't made up the official rules. This is all kind of winging it. Luke's getting nervous as I'm speaking. But we will be announcing a winner. And the only way to get in this completely free drawing, which right now there's a maximum of 160 people, and so you got a really good chance, is to take a screenshot of your review on iTunes of the Salt Strong Fishing Podcast and then email it to fish@saltstrong.com. So that is it. That's how you can help us tremendously, and we're going to be pumped. I'm looking forward to this. We've talked about it, and it never happened. We're like, let's just do it and tie it around this podcast. This thing has been taken off. So
yeah, and we'll be sure to use these lures as well. It'll be
yes.
It'll be a blast.
Yes. All right. So let's get back into it. The number one most versatile overall, if like you had to pick one, what is it, Lukey?
It is just a soft plastic paddle tail. And for those watching on YouTube, I'm showing one on the camera right now. Again, a lot of different makes, models, and it is surprisingly effective for how simple it is. And they're inexpensive. There's a lot of options is the only caveat, and that's what we'll explain in the rest of this podcast is just how to kind of weed through the different options you have, and obviously it depends on the depth you're covering, the size bait fish that you're trying to mimic, and other factors that we'll cover.
Yep. And for some of you who've been following us for a while, you might remember when we first brought Captain C. Richardson on, we did this 3-part video series with him, and it was like all unscripted, unfiltered, and we were out in the water. And we asked C. Richardson, if you know him from Flats Class TV, and was a great tournament fisherman. And we asked him that same question, like, if you could only have one lure, what would it be? And he didn't even hesitate. He's like, paddle tail. I thought he was going to say a mirror lure. And he's like, man, a paddle tail all day long. And I was like, well, really? And he explained why. He's like, when I go to a new area, that is the best bait. That one, I can cast it pretty far on a jig head, and I can cover so much ground at a pretty quick speed, and it attracts strikes. I mean, it attracts strikes from anything around, right? I mean, it's got a ton of vibration. You can move the water at different depths pretty quickly. And he's like, that is my go-to bait. And then we had the father-son team on, Mike and Mark Cowart, who are one of the best redfish teams in the country, in the whole nation. And they're definitely the best father-son team out there. We asked them the same question. And these are guys who are like, I mean, we got real money on the line here in these tournaments. And they said the same thing. They preach their pre-fishing 100% is paddle tails for the most part. That's all they do. They're making lots of casts, covering as much ground as possible, and trying to figure out where the fish are. Paddle tail. And we've asked this to multiple fishing guides and tournament pros, and I have not met one yet that doesn't have a paddle tail, at least in number 1, if not number 2, slot. And so just so you know, this is not just us thinking this. I mean, it is across the board. Most pros will agree this is the bait you're going to use, especially if you're going after, the speckled trout and snook and flounder and redfish, et cetera. But this, as Luke mentioned, I mean, we've caught, this past couple of weeks, tons of bass, gar. We had stuff caught up in, muskie and stuff up in Canada. I mean, it's just crazy how many different species have been caught just in the last 30 days that we've been monitoring on our page with our little Slam Shady paddle tail. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it might be close to like 40 species. It's the one guy caught 9 different. I was like, what the world? It's crazy. So this thing can work. And for the rest of the podcast, we're going to talk about the why. And I think especially if you're a live bait angler, this is going to be priceless for you, and just hopefully simplify everything where you don't need to go out and buy an entire second bedroom like Luke has of tackle, and you don't need to go to Bass Pro and stock up on 50 different packs of all these different stuff. Like, keep it simple to start. And then as you kind of master that, then spread out and go to, jerk shads and shrimp and other types of bait. So,
yeah. And just to that point, and just wanted to make sure this was clear. And one reason why this lure is so good, this type of lure, is not only is it, it's just versatile, as Joe mentioned, but also at least when I have it on, it helps me not even have lure selection worries on my mind. Like when I'm out fishing, like I'm not thinking, oh man, like, am I using a good lure? Hey, maybe I should change. Like I'm not getting any strikes. It makes me really put the focus where the focus should always be, and that's on finding the feeding zones. That's that's looking at the actual conditions, and based on the the weather and the tides and the season and the target species, is just totally thinking about where are my best odds at finding the feeding redfish or trout or snook or flounder or all the above. Where should I go? And as long as you have a good lure, right, that you trust, you don't need, like, that's your focus. You're not even worried. At least I'm personally not worried at all about like changing out lures, because I have one that I trust, and that's a big reason why I believe it's a really good bait, and because it can be used on all different depths.
So what does it mimic, Luke? What is this? Just it's just a bait fish?
Yeah, I mean, mostly bait fish, but let me see if I can pull. I took some underwater footage just to show some. Let me see if I can figure out this screen share thing for those listening, or for those watching. But for those listening, a paddle tail, it's basically, it's a soft plastic lure. Let's see. Can you see the screen, Joe?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's a soft plastic lure, and those who are on YouTube can see this. It's it has a paddle at the end, and then as you take it through the water, the drag on the water makes that tail wiggle back and forth. It basically resembles a swimming fish. Let's see if I can just play this, see how it looks. Yeah, so you can see that tail is basically creating its own action, which is pretty slick. And so when you jig it, so it looks like just a swimming fish as it's going along. So you don't have to do any sort of fancy retrieve. It works with just a straight retrieve. That's super simple. But also, if you jig it, and do some twitches, you can make it look like a scared shrimp as well, right? Scared shrimp, when they get spooked, they dart real quick, a short, quick dart, many times, a couple in a row, and then they kind of fall. To a fish, right? A fish who just sees that motion out of the side, out of the corner of their eye, they're going to immediately think shrimp, assuming that they're feeding on shrimp, and they're going to go pounce on it. So again, it's mostly for resembling bait fish, but even in the wintertime when the bait fish aren't very prevalent, and a lot of these fish are feeding on shrimp, it still works very well.
So where are people screwing up? Is it in the rigging? Is it the retrieval? I mean, is it all of the above? Like, I remember the first time I used one, and I still remember just not, because it just didn't seem natural, because I was more of like, we were bass guys, and it's like, all right, I'm just going to do straight retrieve. It just didn't, because we weren't using this when we were bass fishing, we were young. Yep. And it just didn't feel right. Is that where you think people mess up on it?
Well, number one is the biggest issue, the biggest mistake, as far as preventing anglers from catching as many fish as they want, is not being in the right spot. So we'll set aside, that's a different subject. Yep. We'll assume that somebody's in the actual spot selection was good. Spot selection was good based on the tides and the weather. The number one issue, I would say the number one most common issue, I would say there's two, they're probably even. Number one is rigging, as you mentioned. If it's not rigged properly, so those on YouTube can see this. It needs to be rigged where it's very streamlined. There cannot be any curves. And with jig heads, you have a little bit of flexibility. You have a little bit of room for error, because this jig head is keeping it weighted, is keeping it keeled, where as it's going through the water, it's not helicoptering. That's helicoptering is what you really want to avoid. That's not a natural motion. Nothing is in the water just doing a corkscrew. That's not natural. Spinner baits or spoons do, but all that's doing is resemblance. To a fish, they just see a flash. Now we have a fixed object, and if it's sitting there doing a big old corkscrew, that's going to freak them out. They're just going to be scared, because that's not something that they're used to seeing. So rigging is a very big deal. It has to be rig streamlined. So we have videos on that too that we can link down below. So rigging, take very good care and be diligent when you're rigging, because if it's not rigged right, it's not going to work right. And but if it is rigged right, it can be, as we mentioned before, an incredibly effective bait.
And so that means hook coming through the dead center, right? And then no massive curves where you
Yep.
either have usually too much kind of soft plastic in there, or in some cases too little where it's just way stretched out and looks funky.
Yeah. So basically, if you need a couple things. Number one, sometimes baits in the package come where they're kind of deformed, where like they're curved over, and those are just ones to like not use, or to put in like a really hot, like put it in the sun and leave it in the sun on a flat surface, and it'll kind of put it back into shape. But yeah, if it's looking straight, the bait needs to look straight before you rig it, and then after you rig it, it still needs to look straight, right? And looking from all angles. Like if there's any sort of curves, looking from the top or from the side, re-rig it. Re-rig it and until it looks good before you even cast. So that's the rigging. Again, we have a lot of videos on that, on rigging all sorts of different soft plastics. So the other variable, which is again just as important, if not more important, and it probably is a big reason. More I think about it, probably is one of the bigger reasons, is the depth. So the actual depth that the paddle tail is going. So, for instance, if you're like, there's a lot of different ways to rig paddle tails. I have a couple here that I'm showing. One is on a weighted hook, right? And that's gonna be kind of just buzzing right under the surface. And we have some really cool footage on a recent trip to Louisiana on redfish just smacking these things.
It's not a top water. It's just barely below the surface.
Barely subsurface. And then you can also do one without the weighted hook, and then it's almost like right at the surface, especially if it's like a Z-Man material, which is very buoyant. So contrary, right? Then we have the jig heads, right? And then different size jig heads. So the difference, obviously the jig head will make it dive faster because it's weighted up front. So that front weight is going to help propel the lure further down. And then the weight you use is a big deal. The weight needs to be chosen, based on the target depth, right? And so, and the different tail. It's like different brands have different seek rates, right? They have different densities. Like Z-Mans are what I'm showing here. We use, DOAs a lot. We use gulps a lot. They all have different sink rates. And so in many cases, you can change the depth that you're targeting simply by going from one brand to another brand, like without retying. So the same size jig head, put a denser tail on, you're going to go down an extra 6 inches or maybe even a foot. And that's a big deal. Like it's on inshore saltwater fishing, sometimes again, a 6-inch height difference is all the difference in the world. And so what a lot of people do, and just people that I take out on my boat, I see it all the time, is that they're just not being mindful of exactly what depth their paddle tail is running during the cast. First of all, the rigging part, or you have to rig it on the right either hook or jig head. But even the retrieve speed is a big deal, right? Because the faster you reel it in, the further up the water drag is pulling the bait off the bottom, and even the angle of your rod, right? On if it's really shallow, you need to have the rod up, right? And if you just want to dive down an extra 6 inches to a foot, put the rod tip down, and that really does make a big difference. So there's a lot of factors involved, but number one is just be aware of it and be thinking about it.
So I think the answer that most listeners probably have is why. In what scenarios would you have the rod tip up or down, or go heavier with your jig head to make sure it's down deeper? Because I think that's where the confusion is okay, I get it. But for instance, if I know I'm in an area on a grass flat and it's 5 feet of water, I know there's trout there. Am I trying to be up at the top of the water column, below? Am I going out of redfish or on docks, bridges? Let's talk through some of those tactics.
Well, I mean, statistically, you're gonna get the most strikes by making it as easy as possible for the fish to eat, right? Because so a hungry fish, like if the bite's on fire and those fish, like trout in a 6-foot grass flat, if they're fired up, they're going to come up to the surface and pop whatever they see, right? But they'll also hit something that's right down there at their face because it's easy, right? It's there. But when it's the days that the fish aren't very aggressive, that those are the days that we really need to be thinking about, because the good days is easy, right? Just kind of throw anything out. But the bad days, it is really important. I won't say bad days, the days where they're not quite as aggressive.
The grinding days.
Yeah, the grinding days. It's on us, right? It's on us to figure it out and that's the importance of being very diligent and very mindful of the depth coverage and the speed at which you're covering that depth. Because if you do it right, you can trigger a fish that just ate or that has no intention of eating. It's just so easy, and it looks like an easy meal that they just can't help themselves. Their predator instinct is just going to cause them to go smack it, even though they're not hungry at all. And they're not going to travel 6 feet to go get it. They're going to travel maybe like 3 inches. And so that's the importance of making sure that your retrieve is good. And so on that 6 foot depth grass flat example that you mentioned, say the bite's tough, those trout, they're not just levitating up in the water column as far as when they're stationary. They're almost always going to be in the grass. They need safety from dolphin and sharks and everything else that eats them, tarpon. So if knowing that it's a tough day and that they're not going to travel a long distance to come eat, like, it's on us to make sure that that our paddle tail is running as close to that grass as possible without getting stuck. And so obviously that's, part of that is retrieve speed. And then part of that is, the rod height, the rod angle to the water. And then, a big part of that is the jig head. And so it's just about being mindful of all those. So what I would do is I would go to, say if it's 6 feet of water and like a 3-inch paddle tail, I will go with like a 1/4 ounce, maybe even bigger jig head. And I would try to get it to where I could feel the grass on the speed that I think is good. And then I'll adjust my rod angle to make it where it is just not hitting the grass. If that makes sense.
Yep.
And even throughout the cast too, it's not just like find it and stick with it. As the bait gets closer to the water, the scope of the line is coming up. So you basically need to account for that and move your rod tip down as you're retrieving. As it's getting closer to you, if your rod's up at the beginning, you generally should start putting it down, and that's gonna help keep that same depth. It's like if you look at a lot of these videos, like that video we published recently where I was actually using this exact bait, this 3-inch paddle tail on the jig head on the
slam shady.
Yeah, and this is a 3/16 ounce jig head. It's pretty light for a buoyant bait like this. But I caught redfish in like 2 feet of water. I caught a grouper in about 4 feet of water, and I caught multiple snook and some more redfish in like a foot of water. And if you look at that video, you'll see that and when I was fishing the shallows, I would start with my rod tip up, and then throughout the retrieve, I would go down. But when I was fishing that deep mangrove where the grouper was caught, I had the rod tip down the entire time. And after I casted it, I just let it sit. I let it sink on its own for a while before I started doing the retrieve.
That was going to be my next question is, when you are making, let's just say a pretty decent cast over a grass flat or in a mangrove line, like you had that grouper, are you always letting it drop and kind of feeling the bottom first before you retrieve, or is it you change it up or what?
I guess the best answer is I'm always changing it up until I find what's working, and then I stick with it. And that's another mistake. Like it's kind of like going to the same spot over and over again, like we used to do, and just wondered like why we weren't consistent.
Well, that was you. I just was following you.
Well, I'm roping you into it. We've all done it, right? Everybody does it. But yeah, so the same thing is even with cast, like even cast by cast, if one cast isn't getting a strike and I have confidence that there's fish there, I won't cast the same exact spot, but I'll cast to a similar spot, change up the retrieve a little bit. I'll go either slower, faster. I'll like make sure that I'm like constantly bumping the bottom. Sometimes I'll take it up off the bottom, and eventually there's going to be one that works. And that's generally what's going to be the best thing going forward. So.
Yeah. And especially in those potholes. And I've seen it so many times when we're fishing and you're on a grass flat and you got the potholes, and those potholes many times are holding, predator fish like trout and snook and reds. And those fish are not, like you said, they're not sitting there at the top. They're down there in predator mode looking for shrimp and crustaceans and stuff to kind of come over that ledge. And boom, when you're that close and it comes right in front of their face, it's just that reaction strike. And and had you been way up in the water column, to your point, if it's even an average day, a lot of times you're just going to sit there and watch it go by.
Yeah, in wintertime especially, when these when the trout will hunker down to those potholes, and a lot of times those potholes will be like maybe even a foot down, sometimes a little bit more from the top of the grass, and that's why it's important to wear some good glasses and be mindful of where your bait is. So if you're just buzzing the grass blades, right, like as you should on a normal flat, as you're buzzing the grass blades, as that pothole comes into account, if you stay that same level, now that's a foot and a half, 2 feet off the bottom, right? And on a good day, on a day where those fish are aggressive, they'll come up and pop it no problem at all. But on those slow days, on those days like a wintertime day, a cold front just came through, the day that we used to like never even bother fishing because we thought the fish were just too cold, too lethargic. If you just sit there and just drop it right in their face, they'll hit it most of the time because again, it's an easy meal. It's their predator instinct is basically telling them, hey, like I'm going to eat this. This is like just the easiest meal ever. And so that like once I started doing that and started like really paying attention to making sure that as I buzz the blades, and then as soon as a pothole comes down, just like slowly let it go down. That has been a total game changer, whether I'm using paddle tails or not, but especially these paddle tails, um, which if you just keep reeling, will stay at that same level.
So let's talk about that. Just overall retrieval. I think one other reason that so many pros like the paddle tail is if you do have a family who is just dying, and even my little daughter, when we took her out, just someone who wants to go out there and the first time and you don't have live bait, don't have time for it, that the paddle tail is so simple because you can just tell someone, hey, you make the cast and count to 2. I mean, you don't have to hit the bottom to make sure they don't get snagged or anything, and then just doing a straight retrieve. So let's talk about that and how fast are you doing it? Are you changing it up? And I know you had that video recently. I think it was for insiders only, where because you showed your actual spot and all that. But the one takeaway, besides where you were fishing, was you got a lot of strikes using this Z-Man Slam Shady paddle tail on the drop, right? It was when you were reaching down to grab the trolling motor, I believe. Yep. So let's talk about just retrieval for a while.
Yeah. So with paddle tails, again, there's never like there's never like the one retrieve that's always best. A straight retrieve is very effective. We've caught a ton of fish doing that, and actually, those fish in Louisiana, we're actually responding to the straight retrieve better. If we jerked it, that'd actually kind of freak them out, and they would turn away. But yeah, and some days like that day, that report where the slam plus the grouper was caught, the biggest fish were hitting when, as you mentioned before, I was doing a straight retrieve, and then I had to make an adjustment of the trolling motor, and I have like one of the hand control trolling motor, so I'd have to like stop reeling for like a maybe second and a half, right? Like a really quick transition. So that lure probably stopped for maybe a second and a half, dropped maybe 4 inches. And in that drop, that's when it got picked up by the biggest fish. So in many cases, especially when the fish aren't super aggressive, they'll sit there and follow it for a little bit. And then a lot of times it takes just some little small change to get them to strike. So in many cases, I'll do a straight retrieve for the most part, but just like every, 3 seconds plus or minus, I'll just do like a small little rod bump just to kind of give it some sort of different action, or just a stop, like just a quick stop, and then continue on. Just something to make it where there's some sort of difference that could trigger a strike. And in many cases, that's when the strike happens. But you don't have to do that, right? A straight retrieve can catch a ton of fish as well.
And I'm going to do a quick little pitch for the Insider Club. I watch pretty much all the videos. We're putting out new stuff, it seems like every few hours, so it's tough to watch all of it. But I thought it was almost like watching game film, right? If those of you who played sports growing up or just know what game film is in general with whether it be football or basketball or baseball, that's what Luke and Tony and our coaches are doing every week. We're actually going to real fishing spots, like brand new spots, and showing all the pre-trip planning. But the coolest part is you found that out going back to your game film, because we have GoPros all over the place. And Luke's watching and he's looking for these trends, these patterns, so that we can teach people like you, like, hey, here's what's working right now in these different areas and depths. And you showed it to me. I was like, holy smokes, that's awesome. And he's like, what do you see? And I was like, wait a minute, there's a trend here. Every time he stops to bend down, he all of a sudden you basically bent over real quick and then came back up, and all of a sudden you had a thump and a fish on. It
Yeah,
was like,
within a second. Yeah, within a second, the fish was on, and the same thing happened when I was fishing with Dad. I guess that was just last month, but we were using spoons in this case, and he totally outfished me, and it was driving me crazy because we were using the same spoon, and I was even asking him, hey, like, what are you doing, man? Like, what's going on? And he didn't tell me. I don't think he even knew, but he was just doing something different on his rod motion, and I didn't know it until I actually watched the footage. And yes, that's the cool thing about being diligent and filming and reporting small things, because there's a lot of small details that can make a very big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, it was cool. And I've seen some people that have been now using, especially the Z-Man Slam Shady, because it's our custom bait, even though you can use anything, and we still use. We're not sponsored by Z-Man. We think it's the best one for overall in terms of lasting forever. And that Slam Shady color is pretty sick. We have people from Texas all the way up, to New Jersey now catching inshore slams on this one paddle tail. Let's talk to, because I don't think we covered all the different ways to rig it. I mean, I know you covered like that owner twist lock hook where you're kind of doing it weedless. I know I've personally used the weed guard here in the lake where we have a lot of just structure and junk down there. So I've been using that weed guard. Any other ways besides just the normal jig head? Have you been? And I know in Louisiana we're using the popping cork, I mean, of all things, and it was killing it. The popping cork with the paddle tail, and people like, you really caught every one of those fish with a popping cork and a paddle tail. I was like, yeah, it was the number one thing that we had. I mean, we tried other stuff. It was money.
Yeah. So the other popular way is with popping corks, and I generally am not a fan with popping corks because they don't allow for that depth, the depth customization that I mentioned earlier, where like if you see the pothole, you can dip it down. You can't do that with popping cork because it's literally forcing it up at a certain point below the surface. However, when the water's really murky, like what we saw in Louisiana, right, like fish really need the vibration. They can't see very well, if anything, and so they're relying on feel and smell because they can't rely on sight. So their feel and smell is elevated. Where on fishing clear water, like we have at least here in Florida for a lot of the year, they a lot of times just focus on sight, and so we don't need a ton of vibration. These these little paddles do give off a pretty good amount of vibration, so that even in murky water they can feel it. But when it's super murky and it's rough out, it is necessary in many cases to get a popping cork, because that cork is making just a ton of noise. It sounds like a big old fish going up there and feeding, which again will just light up the predator instinct. Hey, somebody's eating. I'm going to go try to get something too. And they'll swim up and they'll look around, and the first thing they see is that jig head, with ideally a jig head with the paddle tail or even any kind of soft plastic. A lot of people use live shrimp, but I don't think it's necessary. I think a paddle tail is just as effective and saves a lot of money on shrimp. So anyhow, they'll hear that noise from the popping cork. They'll look up just again because they heard and felt the noise, and they look up, and then the first thing they hone in on is that jig underneath the popping cork, and they'll go up and smack it. And we caught some giants in Louisiana doing that method. And that water was, I mean, we probably couldn't see like maybe an inch or two under the surface. It was really dark and muddy. They've had a lot of rain, and just a lot of runoff from the Mississippi was chalking it up.
Yeah. And everything from big old jacks to bass. We gar. It was crazy. Fun day. All right. So let's move on to any other rigging besides that. We mentioned a completely weedless, like with an actual weed guard is one way that we.
Yeah. They have jig heads with the weed guard, but that's just not as weedless as the weighted hooks, because this will just kind of ride over all this. Like if it's like floating seagrass, which is what I'm dealing with a lot over here in Bokeelia lately, is I'm using the paddle tail on the weighted hook, because it basically rides right over the grass, and then it'll slowly start going back down, whereas that jig head kind of plows through. And in many cases, even though the jig head has the weed guard, it'll still just, the jig head itself will snag onto the grass, and so the jig head with the weed guard is not nearly as effective with seagrass. It's great around rocks and hard structure and docks, but with seagrass, something soft, it's gonna plow through it and snag it.
But I guess the bad news with like using that owner hook, if you only have a 16th ounce, you're not going to be able to cast as far. And especially if you're using the Z-Man, which is pretty buoyant, it's not going to get down as deep.
Pros and cons to everything. Absolutely right.
All right. So let's go to size, because, we personally have the 3-inch, which is like the Minnow Z in Slam Shady, the 4-inch, which is what we were catching most of those big bull reds. I mean, I think there might be more fish caught overall in the 3-inch and just general across the country. And then now we have the 5-inch. We just released the scented one, the Paddler Z, all these crazy names, all in Slam Shady color. And then I saw Z-Man and iCast that came out with like the 7. And I mean, we've seen obviously some really big swim baits out there. So like, when do you change up size, and does it just match the hatch? What are the rules of thumb there on all these different sizes, just to simplify for people? Yeah,
I mean, the general rule is as you said, match the hatch. Simplified, it's the 3 and the 4-inch are what I use most of the time, just because, in general, if a fish is going to eat, you can catch more. Like the average size might be a little bit less, but a big snook is still going to eat a 3-inch paddle tail. It'll eat a 5 and 6-inch one that maybe like a 8-inch trout won't go after. But so yeah, I'm generally using a smaller one. But like in the fall is the season where the bait is typically the biggest, and that's generally when I will not use 3-inch very often, and I'll be using 4 and 5. I rarely go bigger than 4 and 5 because I feel like it's not necessary. I feel like my average strikes go down without seeing like a much bigger fish catch.
Yep.
So I generally stick with the 4 and 5 in the fall, and then I stick with pretty much only the 3 in the winter. And in the summer, I kind of switch back and forth just to see what works best. So a lot of times I'll start with 1, and then if the bait's like much bigger, if I'm using a 3 and I'm seeing a lot of bigger bait, then I go up to 4, and then vice versa. But in many cases, I always have them both with me, and I'll start with 1. So like right now, I'm basically starting with the 4-inch because we're pretty much getting close to the fall. We're late summer, early fall time. The bait's getting pretty big, and so I just want to make sure that that mine is sticking out and mine's being noticed. But again, like once we hit Decemberish, so as soon as some big cold fronts start coming in, then I'm just going to go down to the 3 and stick with it. But as soon as the mullet run happens and the bigger bait's coming through, then I'm definitely throwing the 5s.
Do you change up your jig heads? I know, some of these things have, smaller shanks and stuff, and all of a sudden you get a 5-inch versus a 3. Are you having to change it up?
I mean, it's not necessarily bad to do it. I just don't think it's required. And the general rule of thumb, the reason why a lot of people do is because, like if you're using a 5-inch, like I'll just show this for those on YouTube. So this is a 3-inch, a little small paddle tail on a normal size jig head, the 3/16 ounce jig head with I believe it's a 2-aught size hook. And if I have a bigger bait, right, there's going to be a lot of plastic sitting behind the hook. And so if you get a short strike, you're not going to hook it, right? You literally can't hook it because the actual hook is not in its mouth. But generally those short strikes are smaller fish. And so I'm not terribly upset if I miss those. If it's a big fish and it's coming up to eat, even a 4 or 5-inch bait, it's going to suck it down. And so mostly those short strikes are like ladyfish and smaller trout that aren't just going up there and wolfing it down. Because if big fish wants to eat, whether it's lethargic or not, when it makes up its mind to eat, in most cases, especially if it's under 5 inches, under 6 inches, really, just the force of it opening its mouth is going to pull whatever's there and straight in.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I'm not too worried about getting a bigger hook size, although it might help get some of those smaller fish that short strike. But as far as the bigger ones, I don't think it'll make a difference.
Cool. So anything else on the size?
No, I mean, the biggest thing is match the hatch. Size is definitely a big deal. And like if I'm seeing fish and obviously if I can see the bait, I'm trying to mimic the bait. But if I'm casting and I actually see fish and they're not responding to it, I will change size before I change the color. So I do believe that size is the more important variable than color. Although what trumps all that is the motion, right? The motion in the water, which we covered earlier.
Cool.
that is what generally will make or break the strike. But sometimes they're really honed in on something big. Sometimes they're really honed in on something small, and so it's up to us to try, kind of figure it out every day. But what I said earlier is kind of the overall scheme as far as, season specific, where fall's the biggest, winter's the smallest, and then, everything else is in between.
All right, before we get in like the different brands and the pros and cons of all these and colors, one other thing I had written down here was just the importance of casting, with the current and in different situations and skipping. I mean, I've seen, obviously we both do. You do just a phenomenal job of skip casting underneath docks and underneath mangrove trees and stuff like that. So talk about that real quick, because that's just another mistake a lot of people make in terms of how they position their boat or kayak and then where they're casting.
Yeah. So the most important thing, what you said first, is the current aspect, and yes. So the way to increase your odds on getting strikes is to be casting into the current, cast up current, so that you can retrieve your bait with the current. That's where most of these predator fish are expecting their next meal to come from. And so that's, that is generally where they're looking. That's going to increase your odds. If you come from their tail, and sometimes you'll bump their tail, like they obviously can't see it. So you'll bump into them before you even have a chance of getting a strike. And that's totally going to ruin it. But even if you don't bump into them, it's not the natural way. Obviously, if the current's barely moving, then it doesn't really matter. But if it's strong enough where the grass is sideways, or if you look behind like a crab trap buoy and you can see, the eddies, or behind, if there's like a rock jetty and there's a big eddy around it, you really need to be going with the current. Super important. But if it's a flat and you can't tell which way the current's going, then it's probably not that big of a deal. You can do either way. As far as the skip cast, that really comes into play if you're fishing really close to structure. And like in that video again, where I caught that slam with that paddle tail when I was doing the lesson on exactly, I was covering all this stuff in video format basically. But I was toward the end, when I was targeting snook that were by the mangroves, I was doing a purposeful skip cast, because all my strikes were happening like within a foot of the mangroves. And so if I didn't get a good skip cast into like a little nook, I wasn't going to catch anything. It was as simple as that. And so when doing skip casts, you need enough weight to get the velocity or the momentum to where it's strong enough to let the bait keep going once it hits the water. But you can't have too much weight, or else it'll just plummet in the water as soon as it hits. So what I was using that day is, again, this 3-inch Slam Shady paddle tail with the 3/16 ounce jig head. And I feel that's in my opinion, the best combination and the best actual overall size to get a good skip without having to worry about it being too heavy to get you stuck as soon as it lands. So when I'm fishing close to mangroves, I'll actually go with this lure, and it's been incredibly good.
Are you itching to play some footage or something?
I just have some of the footage from Louisiana up, which is pretty sick.
Yeah. I thought you were going to do the mangrove one. Yeah, let's definitely pull that up, and obviously we'll talk through it for those of you who are podcasting it.
Actually, we'll start this off with a pretty cool first time has ever been showed. Let me get this screen share. This is I guess you saw this, Joe, but where that first time I was testing the Slam Shady, and we got the Wolf camera. And so what I did is I went out, I was at this spot that I found the day before, and the snook were pretty aggressive. And with this Wolf camera, I don't have a picture of it, but it's one of those cameras that that's in line with your line. So you tie one end of it to the line that goes up to your rod. And then you have to tie a little leader behind it that goes to your lure. And so you cast, I was casting the whole camera out, which is really weird. And I was reading up on it, and it said to get maybe 10 to 12 inches of leader. If you do any more, you can't really see the lure. So I was throwing this big old camera out with 10-inch leader that goes to the Slam Shady, and I got a strike in the first couple minutes. It was hilarious. And so here, so you can see, there's the bait. It's kind of crazy until it lands. I'll go ahead and play it.
Whoa.
They just landed.
What? Oh,
And
that's
wait a
cool.
second. Oh, you just got smoked.
Oh, snook.
Right there. It was hilarious. But
Oh,
yeah,
that's
there you
cool
can
right
see.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to do a slow-mo. Yeah, right there. So you can see the snook, and it is just about to pounce on that bait. It comes in from behind into the side, which is normal. So in general, you're not going to get a fish hitting from the very front. And typically it'll see it, it'll come trail it, get behind it, and then come up and grab it. And so that's what happened here. That blade of grass was kind of in the way on the actual strike. But I'll be posting this video. I'll do a good slow-mo of it.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean,
So
they're fish just like humans, right? I mean, we eat. We're looking at our food. We don't eat it from. I mean, can you imagine if your spouse or waiter, someone just you just keep hitting your plate in the back of your head? You're like, what the heck's going on here? People, I mean, they're no different. I mean, if a fish does not want to get smacked in its butt and its tail when it's trying to eat something.
yeah, and it's just the predator instinct to go away from the eyes too. So that's anyhow. So let me we'll show some. Here's a cool footage of one of the Louisiana fish, and so this was the 4-inch slam shady rigged on the weighted hook. So we were sight fishing, and so keep your eyes right around here. We were just going around. We were hoping to get some good sight fishing in, and all of a sudden I saw this redfish coming right at us. It was right about here, and so I cast short of it. I gave it a little bit of time to get close, and I just started reeling. And this fish came up and smacked it. So there it lands. You can see the red coming, and I just started reeling, and it hit right at the boat. It was incredible. And and then the other cool thing. Let me see if I can find that video. So as I was reeling that fish in, there was another one right in front of it. These redfish there were just silly. I think this is the right one.
Oh, this is when I was filming you the other camera, and you're like, "There's another one."
Yeah, Joe. Yeah, so Joe had the camera up, and so I just pointed to it. And I was like, "Hey, there it is." And let me see if I can get to a point where you can see that fish. Yeah, so it's right here. You can see it right there. And so, for those of you who are just listening, I'm fighting this redfish that was probably like 28 inches or so, and literally 4 feet away from it, where my redfish was thrashing, and we were in like 2 feet of water. This other redfish was just sitting there swimming around like nothing was going on. And so Joe made a little pitch to it. And this is an example of the retrieve. So you can see right now, this redfish saw, he sees his lure, and Joe does a twitch right as it was coming up, and it totally backed away. Couldn't really see it there.
It's a pretty horrible twitch too. Just
yeah, it was. And so it's a big deal. Retrieve's a big deal. And so the next one, Joe cast up there, and the redfish he led it perfectly, and then he just did a straight retrieve, and it went up there and smacked it. So so again, it's just and so there you can see my rod's been over, now his been over. It was awesome.
And I think that was the 3-inch, right? Slam shady on the I don't know if it's Mustad or owner, but yeah, it was one of those just really small weighted hooks. I was basically at just barely subsurface, and that paddle tail sometimes was even hitting the top of the water. And you're right, it was crazy because your instinct when you see a fish like that is to do a couple little twitches to kind of get their attention. And every time we did it, occasionally we might get a strike, but it seemed like every time they would kind of wait and pause, and as soon as we started doing straight retrieve again, boom, they come up and destroy it.
Yeah, but other days is different. Like some days, like even like that day we talked about earlier, where I was getting my best strikes when the straight retrieve halted or got jarred in some capacity. And so this is the importance of not getting set on one thing in particular, because every day is different.
Yep.
And the conditions are always changing, the fish behavior is changing. And it's important for us to be able to react to it and to identify it. And you can't identify it if you're not testing different cast retrieves.
All right, so let's talk about brands. Clearly, we're a little bit biased to Z-Man because we personally spend our own hard-earned money buying the baits. We are not sponsored. They don't give us a penny. In fact, they charge us a lot of money for these stinking baits. But they were, and if the Z-Man you're listening, thank you. They were nice enough to give us the opportunity to do some custom baits with us because they believe in what we're doing. And we came up with a color that simply works. I mean, we tested it. We have given it to pros who have actually, there's money has been won using these exact lures. Pretty cool stuff. So we're biased to that, but at the same point, we use other stuff just because we're not sponsored. And in the day, we don't have any allegiance to any of them. But what are what are your thoughts on different brands? I mean, Z-Man's a little bit, newer, if you will, but they have that Elastec, which makes it tough to ignore. But I mean, what, DOA for the longest time?
Yeah, I mean they all have their pros and cons, and so in my my philosophy is that there's three overall types of I guess all the different brands fall under three different categories of soft plastics. Number one, we'll start with Z-Man, is that it's the strength. Like the Elastec material is really strong; it can withstand a lot of damage. Yeah, pufferfish will get them. Like the pufferfish will kind of ruin anything, but like pinfish and stuff generally won't mess up Z-Man baits. So theirs is tough, right? Their pro is tough. Their con is that they're super light and you can't cast them very far. So you need more weight to cast the Z-Man baits in particular. I think there's another company I saw. Some other company that had something real similar. I can't remember what it was, but anyhow, so strength is the pro, distance is the con, and if you're using a weighted hook, right, the bait can't get down very far. So the material is not dense enough. It's super strong, but it's not dense. And so another thing I would say is the scent focused. Like gulps would be like the number one thing that come to my mind. The gulp has a lot of scent, distributes a lot of scent. It's an actual water-based material, and which is unique. It's not like the other soft plastics where like gulps, if you leave it on the jig head like overnight, or even like while you're fishing with something else in the sun, it's going to shrivel up and harden up and be totally useless. You have to soak it back in water again. But so the pro of that is that it gives a good amount of scent, and it can help attract strikes on a tough day. The bad news is that the junk fish, they strike it more aggressively, and it gets totally ruined. And now that they changed the formula around, it's super soft. So like a pinfish now can go up and ruin $1 bait in like the first cast. It's like super frustrating.
Yeah.
So that's number two. Number three is I'll say the traditional, I believe it's an oil-based material where it's a soft plastic, but it's not water-based. So you can leave it on a hook and it's not going to dry up. It's stronger than the gulp stuff, but not quite as strong as the Z-Man. But it's more dense, so you can cast it further. So like compared to a Z-Man, you can cast it further on like the same jig head or the same weight. It'll dive down a little bit deeper if that's what you're in need of. But it'll withstand more abuse than the gulps, but it won't withstand as much abuse as that Elastec stuff. So that's, in my opinion, like the high level kind of overview. And within those, we have DOA, you have Slayer, you have Zoom, and there's a ton of them. And even with the scent focus, there's Gulp. Fish Bites makes paddle tails, and I'm sure there's others.
We just bought 2,000 packs of the scented Z-Man ones. So, I mean, even Z-Man is now, and I don't know if it's in the mold or not. I don't think it is. I think it's just basically Procure. Yeah,
it's Procure that's in the packages, I believe, what it is. So it's not like it's not infused. Like the benefit of the Gulp and the Fish Bite is it literally is part of the material. Where like as long as it's still soft, it's still distributing scent out. Whereas, at least to my understanding, and anybody in the notes, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the Procure and Z-Man scented stuff, and at least all the others that I can think of, it's really coated on the outside, not like totally infused. But I would love to be corrected. So yeah, but please do let me know if there's anything else out there, because I want to try it.
Yeah, heck yeah, we do. Cool, man. So color. Got to talk about color with the Slam Shady. If you guys don't know the whole story, we started talking to Z-Man, I guess a year ago is the last I cast. So not this past one, but the one prior, and talked about doing a custom color. And we went around internally just trying out different things, throwing out ideas. We had a dark one, and then shame on us, we should have done this first. We asked our audience, I think we started with the insiders, like, hey, if you guys could pick one color, what would it be? Like, what have you caught more fish on than anything? And by far, it was either some kind of white or off-white or a pearl. And then the next thing was, different colors, like, the glitter colors, if you will, those little sparkles. And we heard silver, gold, and we're like, all right, why don't we get a white one, like a white base, because that seemed to be the most overall powerful color from Texas up to Virginia, and let's put both silver and gold in it. And we got it. You saw that footage of Luke. That was one of the prototypes when he threw it out there with the Wolf camera and the snook struck it. And so we're going around, like we had all these ideas. And Nick, we got to give Nick, our web developer, full credit. He all of a sudden, we were going around like coming up with funny ideas, some names. He's like, how about Slam Shady? And he didn't have to explain it to us. We all got it because Slim Shady, you know, the Eminem, the rapper, is a white rapper with pretty flashy guy, you know, wears gold and that kind of stuff. And it was perfect for Inshore Slam. So we went with it. Z-Man loved it. And it's been, every time we bring it out, I think we have more coming in right now. It sells out. So the things work. It's been pretty cool. So I do have to give a quick plug to that. But I think it's important to simplify. That's really all I'm using right now is Slam Shady, just because we have a lot of it in my tackle box and it works. And it's like my confidence bait. But what are your thoughts? Like, when would you change up color in different seasons or water clarity? Or do you even change up color much?
Yeah, I don't change it up too much. I change the size way before color. And before I change even that, I would change my retrieve speed and tempo. So like that's, in my opinion, the hierarchy of needs, if you will. But and the reason why
Maslow's needs.
Yeah.
Shelter and then depth and then color is last.
That's pretty much it. And so as far as the reason why white is good and why it in general is very effective across, obviously, yes, color does matter. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all. But the reason why I like white overall, especially if I'm mimicking a bait fish, is that it basically takes on the color of the water, which is what all bait fish do naturally. So the general idea on color selection is to mimic the prey just enough to be the right color to match what the predators are looking for, but just off enough to stand out where if there's a ton of bait around, it's not going to be just another one. It's going to be, okay, that one's different, I'm going to go eat it. And that's the easy catch. And so the reason why white is effective in doing that is because white basically as we know, like white reflects light. Like light reflects off whatever's coming to it. So if you're in green water, and there's a fish is 2 feet away and it can see that white lure, to them, it's not white, it's green. It's a lighter shade of green than everything else around. So it's basically the same color as the other bait fish around there, but just a little bit lighter, which makes it stand out. And if the water's super clear, right, then it's going to be kind of white, and then which will be pretty much close to what those bait are. And if the water's really dark, right, if it's tannic water, from a foot or two away, that white is now looking like copper. And so that's the I guess the scientific reason, if you will, on why white is so popular, because it is effective across different watercolors. But in the wintertime, when I'm going after crustaceans, where crustaceans are usually the biggest prey, I guess the prey of choice for most of our inshore predators, I'll go to a darker color, right? I'll try to mimic the shrimp, which in many cases they're going to be like in the backwaters, and they're going to be like a darker color. And so that's when I'll oftentimes go to a dark color pattern, or even green. Green's a great color, but even green, or like that snook from the balcony video was on one of my favorite wintertime baits. That's the DOA, the 4-inch DOA. That's root beer with the chartreuse tail. For whatever reason, works great. Not so much in the summer, but it's like one of my favorites in the winter. So anyhow, that's the general idea, is to match the color of the water and the color of the prey. And in many cases, that's going to be one and the same. But when you're going after fish or shrimp and crabs, you just have to account for their unique color patterns. Fish are almost always going to be matching the color of the water. Shrimp and crabs are going to be matching the color of the bottom. And so the color selection should generally be associated with that.
Cool. And like you said, white kind of helps mimic everything, which is why you need to go to shop.saltstrong.com right now and order yourself some Salt Strong Slam Shadies.
Because the reason why it has been proven to be very effective, even, again, from people we've sent out to people across all the Southeast, both saltwater and freshwater, is that the white is effective, as we know, but that the little flash gives off just enough, like for those days where they can't quite see it. It has both silver and gold flash, so and many times that will just help. At least it seems to really help. These fish just dial in and hone in on the lures. It totally blew me away when I started using it, and now that's like the only color I use on a paddle tail.
Slam shady, cool, man. Anything else besides telling everyone? And we'll have one more must do, which is get in this free drawing that we're going to be doing to fish with us for a weekend. Anything else that you think of on the paddle tail side?
No, I mean, get in the drawing. Yeah, please do leave a review. That means a lot to us. And if you haven't yet tried out the fishing club, I would say just please give that a shot too. If you got anything out of this podcast, you're going to absolutely love the club, because we give detailed stuff like this in a much shorter span, but video based, where you can actually learn the same things while also seeing it being applied. And then not only that, at the end of it, you'll see exactly where every fish is caught, so that you can look for those same types of spots and apply that to your next trip. There's no better way to get good at inshore saltwater fishing. I personally learned a ton just watching others. It started with just me and then Tony, and now it's the whole group are posting their own reports, and it's awesome. It's been a game changer for me, and I'm sure if you got anything out of this, you're gonna absolutely love the club.
Yeah. So join the club. That's at saltstrong.com to get your slam shadies in all three sizes. If you wanted to try them all out, go to shop.saltstrong.com. And then remember, please, once again, we've done a horrible job. We have like 500,000 of actual downloads and 160 reviews, and they're all like awesome. Heck, I had one episode, I had over 150 emails to me. So people are taking the time. We did a horrible job of telling them what to do next. So here's what to do next. Go join the club, the Insider Club at saltstrong.com. Buy some slam shadies, and then go into iTunes. This is iTunes only. I want to be very, very clear. And it's for the entire month of September. So if you're listening to this a few days after it goes live, that's okay. As long as it's September of 2019, you are eligible all the way up until midnight, the last day of September, to take a screenshot of your review in iTunes of the Salt Strong Fishing Podcast, screenshot that sucker, and then email it to fish@saltstrong.com. That's FISH at saltstrong.com. And then we will put that into a drawing. We'll probably do like a fun live video with it where we draw it. And that'll be somewhere in early October. We'll probably try to do it quickly. We'll probably try to do that late fall. And obviously we'll work around with you. You're not going to miss out if the dates don't work right away. If you win, you're guaranteed a trip, assuming you want to take it. So don't worry about that. We work around you, and it'll be really, really fun. I'm pumped. It's fun for us to be able to do it and to reward you guys for taking the time to just give us some love on the podcast. As I mentioned, it helps out big time for this show to grow, to get awesome guests, and for us just to put so much time into this. So thank you all for all the support, all of the love, and I cannot wait to start seeing the emails flood in with your reviews, preferably 5-star if you really like the show.
And if it's after September too, I mean, this is going to be on YouTube. So if after September, still do it, and we'll come up with something fun for any time after September. Have some sort of
good point. I hope it works, and this can be just an ongoing thing where we keep going retroactive and picking people.
I like it.
We have a lot of fun with this podcast.
But one extra thing too is, Joe mentioned to get the Slam Shady. Like if you're looking for a good paddle tail, the Slam Shadies, they really are amazing. I recommend trying them. They're phenomenal. But if you do, join the club first, because we do give group discounts for all club members on these Slam Shadies, plus everything to rig them with. And then not only that, obviously our apparel and stuff too. But on top of that, if you do get the Slam Shadies, I'll follow up with an email just showing you exactly how to rig it, how to retrieve it, just how to maximize your success with it, just to make sure that you're not making the common mistakes that are out there, and you're getting you're catching the most fish per hour while you're out there on the water. So
yep. That's what it's all about, helping you save some time, catch more fish, create more memories. All right, guys, thank you so much, Luke. Thanks for the time. And we will see you guys in the next podcast. Go to iTunes right now. Put in that review. You guys are awesome. We be out. Peace.
See?